Why is a horror movie with no jump scares and no visible ghosts hailed as the most terrifying film of the 21st century? And why does a simple tongue-clicking sound cause the audience to break down collectively and suffer from insomnia all night long? Some say it is destined to go down in film history, while others call it outrageously wicked. Upon its release, it even set a box office record, thoroughly redefining what true horror means. It is not about blood, nor is it about jump scares. It is about watching helplessly as a family is swallowed whole by fear and despair, leaving you with a sense of oppression and suffocation that penetrates your bones and lingers long after the movie ends. And this movie is the absolute classic of suspense horror, Hereditary. The story begins with foreshadowing. As the camera transitions seamlessly from a miniature model house to a real room, the director's first core hint is revealed. Everything happening in this family might just be a carefully designed and manipulated play. Inside the room, Steve wakes up his eldest son, Peter. Today, they are going to attend his grandmother Ellen's funeral. The youngest daughter, Charlie, is not in her bedroom but sleeping in the treehouse. Steve is already used to this because his daughter has been strange since childhood. She almost never communicates with anyone, constantly makes an uncontrolled clicking sound with her tongue, and her only hobby is drawing abstract sketches. At the funeral, Annie's eulogy contains clear signs of alienation amidst the grief. In her description, her mother Ellen was an extremely mysterious person, with private rituals, private friends, and private anxieties. Even at her funeral today, Annie does not recognize most of the guests in the audience. Subsequently, while viewing the body, Charlie's gaze is suddenly attracted to the necklace on her grandmother. But what she doesn't realize is that this seemingly ordinary necklace is about to bring an inescapable doom. After the funeral, the family of four's life returns to calm, and Annie throws herself back into her work. She is a miniature model artist. Besides making exquisite scene models according to customer needs, she habitually sculpts everything happening around her. At night, Annie goes to her daughter Charlie's room. She knows that perhaps only Charlie is truly sad about her mother's passing, as Charlie was raised almost entirely by her grandmother. From the moment Charlie was born, grandmother insisted on feeding her, insisted on raising her as a boy, and rarely let Annie interfere. So Annie understands her daughter's sadness, but she doesn't know how to comfort her. Annie wants Charlie to cry it out to release her emotions, but Charlie won't cry at all. She hasn't shed a single tear from birth until now. After finally coaxing Charlie to sleep, Annie begins to pack up her mother's belongings. In one of the photo albums, she finds a letter her mother left for her. The general idea is asking Annie not to hate her and to forgive her for the things she couldn't say, stating that their sacrifices are not worth mentioning compared to the rewards they will receive. Sacrifice? Reward? These cryptic words leave Annie confused, but a sense of foreboding is quietly planted. The next day in class, a pigeon suddenly crashes into the classroom window without warning and dies. Everyone else is shocked, but Charlie's gaze unconsciously falls on a pair of scissors. So, when the bell rings, she immediately walks out of the classroom. Taking advantage of a moment when no one is looking, she secretly snips off the pigeon's head and puts it in her pocket. However, when she turns around, she discovers a woman across the street staring at her and waving at her with a creepy expression. Meanwhile, Annie, having just finished her work at home, turns around to find her mother's door standing open. A triangular mark has inexplicably appeared on the floor inside. She goes downstairs to ask her husband, but Steve denies it immediately, stating he never went in. To reassure her, Steve immediately locks the door again. At this moment, Steve suddenly receives a call from the cemetery. The staff tells him an inconceivable piece of news. The grave of Ellen, who was just buried, has been desecrated. But to keep Annie from worrying, Steve does not tell her the truth. Annie, on the other hand, uses the excuse of going out to watch a movie to actually visit a psychological support group to relieve her inner pain. In front of strangers, she finally drops her strong disguise and reveals the dark family history. It turns out that before her mother passed away, they hadn't lived together. Her mother suffered from dissociative identity disorder and dementia, which kept their relationship distant. Despite this, she still deeply understood her mother's hardships. When Annie was a child, her father starved himself to death due to mental illness. Her brother also hanged himself in his mother's room at the age of 16 due to schizophrenia, leaving a suicide note accusing his mother of everything, claiming that she put people inside his body. It was precisely after experiencing this series of family tragedies that her mother's condition worsened and Annie had to take her home. But under her mother's extreme desire for control, their relationship never thawed. After her eldest son Peter was born, she didn't allow her mother any intention of getting close. So after that, she handed her daughter Charlie over to her mother to raise. Because of this, Annie has always felt guilty about her family. Her mother's existence caused discord in their family of 4. She wanted to change and ease the tension countless times, but never knew where to start. Although her monologue seems slightly long, it contains a huge amount of information and can be said to be the first key to unlocking the mystery of the entire movie. Moving on, the first turning point of the film and the beginning of the nightmare arrives. To let Charlie interact more with peers and become a bit more normal, Annie completely ignores their reluctance and forces Peter to take his sister to a high school party. At the party, Peter instantly locks eyes on the girl he has a crush on, which prompts him to immediately take out the stuff he has been hiding for a long time. The girl accepts happily and takes him to the second floor. Charlie is left alone downstairs by Peter with the excuse that there is chocolate cake, her favorite. But what they don't know is that the cake contains nuts, to which Charlie is severely allergic. So, just as Peter is indulging in his high, Charlie's breathing instantly becomes rapid, and her throat begins to swell uncontrollably. She has to hurry upstairs to find Peter. Hearing the news, Peter instantly realizes the severity of the problem. He immediately picks her up and rushes to the nearby hospital. Unexpectedly, halfway there, Charlie's symptoms suddenly worsen, looking as if she is about to suffocate at any moment. Peter is incredibly anxious and can only slam the gas pedal to the floor. But just at this moment, Charlie subconsciously opens the car window trying to catch a breath, and a dead deer happens to appear in the middle of the road. And then, the tragedy happens. With a heavy, sickening thud, the surroundings return to a deathly silence. Peter freezes in the driver's seat. He dares not look back, dares not get out of the car, and dares not call his sister's name. He trembles all over. His breathing stagnates. He sits there in a daze for a long, long time, then numbly steps on the gas, drives home silently, goes straight to his room, lies on the bed, and stares, open-eyed, motionless. It isn't until the next morning that a scream, piercing and heart-wrenching, breaks the silence and shatters Peter's feigned luck. Annie eventually discovers the headless corpse in the car because the head was left on the road miles away. But no one notices that a strange symbol has been inexplicably carved onto that telephone pole. And this symbol is exactly the same as Ellen's necklace. Charlie's accidental and tragic death destroys this already teetering family like a nuclear bomb. Annie falls into insane grief and self-blame. She begins sleeping in the treehouse where Charlie often stayed, and her relationship with Peter completely ruptures. And Peter, from this point on, lives in huge trauma and guilt, unable to extricate himself. It is in this suffocating atmosphere that Annie goes to the support group again. But just as she arrives at the door, she feels it is useless and prepares to drive away. At this moment, a strange woman stops her. She tells Annie her name is Joan, and that she was also at the scene last time. She invites Annie to go in and chat, but Annie has no intention of making friends at this time. It isn't until Joan reveals that both her son and grandson passed away, one after another, that Annie's attitude shifts. She finally takes down Joan's number, saying she will meet up when she has time. The next day, while working as usual, Annie accidentally knocks over a paint bottle. Coincidentally, the paint soaks the note Joan left her. After some thought, she decides to follow the address to find Joan. As soon as she arrives at the door, her gaze is attracted by the doormat on the ground, because she remembers that her mother seemed to have embroidered this same design when she was alive. Before she can think too much, Joan's warm hospitality interrupts Annie's train of thought. The two, sharing the same fate, begin to pour their hearts out. Annie tearfully recounts the tragic state of Charlie's death and the reason for the frozen relationship with Peter. A few years ago, she suffered from sleepwalking. One night, she woke up from a dream to find herself standing in front of Peter's bed. Peter was covered in paint thinner, and she was holding a match in her hand. Peter screams in terror, and she herself is equally horrified. It was under the influence of this incident that their relationship grew distant, leading to the complete fallout today. After chatting with Joan, Annie's mood actually eases a lot. That night, the family of 3 rarely sits at the dining table together. However, the harmony lasts only a few seconds before the mother and son start arguing violently again because of Charlie. Annie uses the most vicious language to accuse Peter of never taking responsibility for anything, always wearing that stinking face like he's escaping. And Peter ruthlessly lifts her final fig leaf with a single question. Annie cannot refute it, nor is she willing to admit her mistake. so she ultimately flees the scene. Shortly after, Annie goes to the supermarket to buy materials. Just as she arrives at the parking lot, she encounters Joan again. To her great surprise, Joan has completely changed from her previous negativity. As if reborn, she excitedly tells Annie that she participated in a seance and summoned her dead grandson with the help of a medium. Annie gives Joan an awkward but polite smile. Naturally, she doesn't believe in such ridiculous things. But, unable to resist Joan's invitation, Annie has to follow her home to see for herself. The seance looks very simple. Joan lights a candle, asks Annie to put her hand on an overturned glass with her, and then starts chanting her grandson's name, saying, "If you hear this, move the glass." Annie is frightened by this scene and hurriedly looks under the table, but finds no mechanism. What shocks her even more is that Joan then takes out a chalkboard and asks her grandson to write down what he wants to say. Unexpectedly, the next second, the chalk actually automatically writes a sentence on it. "I love you, Grandma." This causes Annie to lose her composure completely. In terror, she immediately stands up to leave. Joan does not stop her, only shoving a seance instruction manual into Annie's hand before she leaves, explaining some precautions. On the way back, Annie still hasn't recovered from the shock, and strange things begin to happen, one after another. First, while driving halfway, a clicking sound suddenly comes from the back seat. Then, at night, the tossing and turning, Annie suddenly discovers that many ants have inexplicably appeared in the house. These ants are all swarming toward Peter's room. She gets up curiously to check, only to see a scene that makes her flesh crawl. The sleeping Peter is actually covered in dense ants all over his body. Just as she is too scared to speak, Peter's shout pulls her back to reality in time. She looks closely again, only to realize it was just her hallucination. Peter asks her warily what happened, looking at her terrified expression, and questions why she is so afraid of him. Even more unexpectedly, she blurts out a sentence immediately after. In an instant, it is as if they have returned to the night the conflict started. They are soaked in paint thinner, and Annie unconsciously strikes a match. The firelight destroys everything in an instant, and she instantly wakes up from the nightmare. Under the intense stimulation, she thinks of Joan's seance, so she immediately wakes up her husband and Peter. Hearing her incredibly absurd explanation, Steve's first reaction is that his wife has gone crazy, and he subconsciously wants to refuse. But under Annie's repeated insistence, he finally agrees helplessly. They stand holding hands in front of the table. Annie begins to call Charlie's name according to the content in the manual. The next second, Peter feels a cold wind hit him, and then the glass really starts moving. The father and son are in disbelief. Annie, ignoring everything else, excitedly takes out Charlie's sketchbook, calling for her to write down what she wants to say. In the waiting interval, Peter starts trembling uncontrollably, clearly terrified. Fortunately, Steve notices something is wrong with him in time and hurries forward to stop it. Just as they are arguing, a sudden mutation occurs. Finally, Steve throws a cup of water to wake Annie up, and this farce finally comes to an end. But it is also from this moment that a supernatural force begins to fully invade this family. First, Peter's spirit becomes increasingly scattered, and he is in a trance all day long. In class, he suddenly sees an inexplicable blue spot of light flash by, flying from the floor to the ceiling, and then from the ceiling into the bookcase. And it seems that apart from him, everyone else turns a blind eye to the light spot. When he turns his head to look at the bookcase again, his own reflection on the glass actually reveals a strange smile. Soon, Annie receives a call from Steve. Steve tells her that Peter said he is very scared and feels that a vengeful ghost is haunting him, so Steve decides to take him home to rest, hanging up directly after speaking. Unexpectedly, this action causes Annie's emotions to collapse instantly. She feels like she has suddenly become an outsider, isolated by her husband and family. Helplessness and anger surge into her heart, and she smashes all her works to pieces like a madwoman. However, what is terrifying upon reflection is that she leaves only a model of Peter's bedroom, with a headless corpse lying on the bed. Then at night, Annie hears a strange noise coming from the hallway again. She goes to check curiously, turning her head to find Charlie's door opened at some point. Charlie's sketchbook is actually turning pages automatically, and some patterns are inexplicably being drawn on it. On the other side, the sleeping Peter is awakened by the familiar clicking sound. He opens his eyes to see Charlie actually standing quietly in the corner. Then, the sound of a fierce argument erupts. Peter questions why his mother is tearing at his hair, but Annie states with abnormal firmness that she did nothing. but rather came to check after hearing his scream. Hearing him say he saw Charlie, Annie suspects that the sketchbook is behind all this, so she immediately takes it to the fireplace, preparing to burn it. But strangely, as the sketchbook is ignited, her arm inexplicably catches fire as well. Realizing something is wrong, she can only hurriedly rescue the sketchbook, and the flames on her hand extinguish accordingly. To figure out the truth behind this series of strange events, Annie goes back to Joan's house early the next morning to seek help, but she knocks on the door for a long time with no response. What she doesn't know is that in the room separated by a wall, that mysterious pattern is being enshrined, and Peter's photo and crafts made by Charlie before her death are placed on the table, appearing as if some evil ritual is being conducted. At this time, Annie's gaze is once again attracted by the mat under her feet. Looking at the familiar embroidery, she suddenly realizes something and hurriedly runs home to dig out her mother's belongings again. Sure enough, there are several mats of the same style inside. Not only that, but she also finds an ancient book about the demon Paimon. According to the description, Paimon is the god of disaster, ranked 9th among the 72 demons of King Solomon. His image is a man's body with a woman's face, wearing a crown, carrying 3 heads, and riding a camel. It also writes that Paimon needs a male body as a host, and the person who summons him will gain wealth and power. Annie continues to search and is shocked to find in the photo album that Joan had known her mother for a long time. There are also many photos similar to cult gatherings inside, and her mother seems to be the leader of this organization. The more Annie looks, the more uneasy she gets. She finally realizes that the nightmares her whole family is experiencing might have been deliberately arranged by this cult organization. Thinking of this, she hurriedly rushes to the attic, trying to find more clues, because she remembers her mother often stayed there alone when she was alive. Unexpectedly, the moment she pulls down the partition, countless flies mixed with a strong stench pounce on her face. She suppresses her nausea and climbs up, only to see an even more horrifying scene. A headless, dry corpse has inexplicably appeared in the corner. She walks closer in terror, only to discover that it is her mother, who had already been buried. And on the wall next to it, the symbol representing Paimon is drawn. Meanwhile, at school, the distraught Peter sees the blue light spot again. Following the trajectory of the light spot, he finds that someone seems to be calling him outside the door, but he dares not respond and turns back to the classroom. However, the next second, that familiar clicking sound rings in his ear again. Then, his body suddenly starts to twist uncontrollably. The school contacts Steve immediately. Upon learning of his son's abnormality, Steve quickly takes him home to rest. As soon as they return home, Annie rushes out with a look of horror. Ignoring her son's abnormality, she breaks down and tells Steve everything. However, Steve, who already knows the grave was robbed, mistakenly believes that his wife dug her mother up in a fit of insanity. Annie cannot defend herself. Even if she takes out the photo album and tries desperately to explain, Steve maintains a look of suspicion and alertness. With no time to argue, she immediately takes out the strange sketchbook and tells Steve that it has been inexplicably filled with drawings of Peter's head. Annie believes this is a curse and that Peter has become like this because of it, so she begs her husband to burn the sketchbook, saying maybe this will completely end the nightmare. Steve thinks for a long time, but ultimately cannot convince himself to believe these tall tales. Annie is extremely anxious, so she recklessly snatches the sketchbook. At the moment of her complete breakdown, a strange force takes the opportunity to attach itself to her body. Then, when night comes, the final curtain lifts. Peter, just waking up from a coma, gets up to find the house terrifyingly quiet. He tries to call his parents' names, completely unaware that his mother is quietly lying prone on the ceiling watching him. Peter cautiously goes downstairs, only to see the living room has become a mess, and a charred corpse is lying in front of the fireplace. Looking closer in fear, he realizes that it is actually his father. Amidst the panic, a strange noise behind him instantly tightens his nerves. Peter is terrified by this scene and hurriedly flees into the attic. However, Annie, possessed by the demon, continues to bang on the door panel in an almost frantic manner. After the noise finally disappears, Peter looks up to find the attic filled with candles. The corpse in the corner is gone, replaced by a human outline with his photo placed in it. And in the photo, his eyes have been gouged out. He tries to force himself to calm down, desperately telling himself this is just a nightmare. But the next second, he sees the most terrifying scene of his life. His mother is suspended in midair, her expression numb, holding a piano wire in both hands, frantically cutting her own neck back and forth like sawing wood. The mentally collapsed Peter falls to the ground, and the blue light spot takes the opportunity to enter his body. Only now, he is no longer himself. Guided by his mother's headless corpse, he slowly stands up, constantly making clicking sounds with his mouth, and walks step by step toward the treehouse. Inside the treehouse, cult members kneel in worship, welcoming the arrival of God. On the other side of the treehouse, Charlie's head is placed on a statue, and the headless corpses of her mother and grandmother are kneeling on both sides. Just like that, they all become sacrifices to summon the demon. Then, Joan takes the crown off Charlie's head and puts it on Peter's head, announcing that Paimon has finally obtained the male body he wanted. Everyone shouts in unison, "Hail Paimon!" The movie comes to a close in this strange and grand cult atmosphere, and this is Hereditary, a masterpiece that does not rely on cheap scares, but uses psychological horror and fatalistic tragedy to shock the audience. The most terrifying part of the movie is not the demon, nor the gore, but the suffocating feeling of watching everything happen helplessly. Just like the miniature models Annie made, everyone in this family lives in a huge, carefully designed model house. Their joys and sorrows, their partings and deaths are just props manipulated by cultists to welcome the arrival of their God. It makes me wonder, if fate really exists, if we are really just manipulated puppets, then do our struggles and resistance still have any meaning?